But then we were in Trinidad when the war started. They just, on December the 7th, that afternoon, in the day room of our squadron, we had radios and that, and it come over the radio that we had heard it on the news, and that's the way we heard it down there. That Pearl Harbor had been attacked and was under attack. Now to us, it was a Sunday, but it was in the middle of the afternoon, I think around 3 or 4 o'clock. When of course, now what that time is in Hawaii, that would be that morning. I think, what are we, 3 hours?
3 or 4.
3 hours from here.
We're 3 hours from
to
here
California, and I think it's 2 hours in time zones from California to Hawaii.
Okay.
I think there's 5 hours difference, and that's when they were attacking Pearl Harbor. Well, of course, they was broadcasting it on the radio.
So what were you doing then when they?
What was I doing? I don't know. It was a Sunday, and I don't know that I was doing anything. I wasn't working because it was peacetime up yet, and that's all our schedule was. Working on 5 days a week, and that was it.
Well, what changed when you found out the war was on? What changed for what you were doing?
For me?
Yeah.
Well, everything we were tied to, leaves, passes, all that stuff was canceled. We couldn't get a pass to go anyplace. You had to stay on base. We could have no lights on. And they doubled the guard duty of guards around us. I didn't have nothing to do with guard duty. I was just working in the office at the time.
Explain why you couldn't have lights on.
Well, it was blackout because they was afraid if they had a lot of light, I don't know how they could do it so fast. I don't think they could, but they would be bombing this place. So everything was blackout. I don't know if you guys had any of that or not, did you? I don't think so.
No, we didn't really have blackouts, but a lot of things happened to us during the war. I was in high school when the war broke out, but then the next year after I graduated, we all could, you couldn't have, we had to have stamps for everything. Gasoline, even shoes, because rubber would have been made into shoes. We couldn't buy any nylon hose, so when I first got my first job, you'd paint your legs so that you looked like you had hose on it. Wear high heels.
What did you use?
They had a regular, you go to the drugstore and buy a regular bottle of stuff that was special for, we even learned how to make a straight seam down the back, because that's what nylons at that time had, a seam down the back of them. But you couldn't get them during the war. You couldn't get nylons at all. So, and of course we all wore dresses, so we wanted to look like we had hose on.
Mm-hmm.
But sugar and I can't remember some of the other things. I know shoes and sugar. You had to have stamps to get.
Oh, it was rations.
Oh, rationing. Everything was rationed. And you'd save up enough stamps if you wanted to go anywhere in the car. Now, some people could get enough gasoline stamps to go back and forth to work. But my dad and I would get on a bus and just take the bus to work, because we'd save up our stamps and maybe we could go for a ride on Sunday afternoon or something like that.
You said go to work. What did you do?
Well, when I first got out of high school, I went to Baker's because I wanted to further my education. I wanted to do bookkeeping and things like that, and I had 2 or 3 little jobs. I even did bookkeeping one night a week for it was called the Caramel Corn Shop at that time, and then where Halo Burgers is now used to be called Cupie's. And I used to do some of their bookwork on a Monday night.
That's the Halo Burger right in downtown
Right in
Flint
downtown.
on Saginaw.
And so I had 2 or 3 little jobs. I was a cashier at a movie theater one night a week because my folks didn't have any money to send me to college, so I had to pay for my own tuition to go to Baker's. And I kept working these 3 little jobs. Oh, and I babysat, so I'd have enough money that, I could keep up. But anyway, I was working these little jobs and trying to keep myself enough money so I'd go to Baker's. And at that time, you could enroll at Baker's and you could work study and work at your own speed. You could, if you wanted to graduate in a year's time, you could do it. Well, I could have graduated in 9 months, but within 6 months, I was so tired of working and going to school that I quit. And I got a job right across the street from where Baker's was, downtown Flint. And it was called Sanitary Supply Company. And I didn't like the job because I was very timid and I was very afraid because it was all men. And they had a black man down in the basement, and he would be making the sweeping compounds, what they called it. And he would be singing and hallelujah and stuff like that in the basement. And if the men all left and left me alone at the telephone and stuff, I would just be scared to death. That black man was going to come up and get me or something because I'd never been around black people. So one day, Mr. McCormick was his name because he had married Mr. Baker's daughter. And they ran Baker's, so he came across the street to get some sweeping compound or something that he needed for Baker's. And he says, well, that's what happened to you. He says, I wondered why you left class. And I said, well, I couldn't keep it up anymore. I didn't have enough money and I just couldn't do it. He said, well, you don't belong here. So I went back to his office, to Baker's, and called me on the telephone, and he says, can you have a day off? And I said, yes. He said, well, I've got an interview for you at City Ice and Fuel. And he said, will you go for the interview? And I said, sure. So he set me up, and I went out there and got the job right away. And I worked there for a while. Then the government decided that they were going to freeze everybody's wages. You couldn't have any raises, that nobody could get a raise. And I was due for a raise in my job. And so my father said to me, my father worked at Buick in the powerhouse. He says to me, if you really want to make money, I think I can get you into Buick. And I said, well, yeah. So he set me up with an interview at Buick. And when I went to go in to take my interview, the man met me at the door, and I walked me all past all these lines of people that were trying to get interviews to get in. And I was hired right then, that day. I had to go back and give my 2 weeks' notice, but I was hired into the office at Buick. So I worked there till he come home. We got married, and I got a personal leave to get married, and then I went back to work when he went.
How common was it for women to hold positions and
Well,
work?
at that time, women went to work. You've heard of Rosie the Riveter. I mean,
Right.
women had to go to work because the men were all
everyone
gone.
was at
Yeah.
war.
There were too
Okay.
many men gone. But this was in the office, so there were a lot of women working in the office, and I worked
Okay.
in the employment office. And when the war was over and I had to quit my job because he insisted, I was-
Big mistake.
I had
Should
it.
have kept her working.
I was a private secretary to the guy that ran the insurance office. And I would have, I had a real good job and everything. He didn't want me to work anymore, so I had a personal leave when he come home, came home, and or he came home, and I met him in Chicago, and we came back, and then he says, "You go in and tell your boss you're not going to work anymore." So I walked in the office, and he looked at me, and he says, "You're not coming back to work, are you?" And I said, "Well," he said, "if I was in his shoes, I'd say the same thing." So he said, "You're done right now." He said, "I will give you a good recommendation so you'll never have it on your record that you walked out on us or anything like that." So, and then we went back to work. So,
Well,
well, what happened next? I went home and we got a job. When you got a job, couldn't seem to get one around Flint, so we went to Saginaw. And he worked at Bell Telephone, and
yeah, I worked for,
he worked for
in the Bell
Western
telephone
Electric.
office. Actually, I was working for Western Electric, which makes, I don't know if they do anymore or not, all the telephone equipment. All the switch gear in the offices and the switchboards and all the telephones. It was Western Electric. That was just a division of Bell.
Okay.
So he came home in October of 1945, and then we went to Saginaw, and then after the first, he worked up there about 6 months or
So
so,
we worked there all
and they
that.
were going to transfer him to, where,
So Pontiac or
Pontiac.
Detroit.
yeah.
And
he-
we
didn't
couldn't
wanna
find a
live
place
down
to
there.
live. You couldn't find a place to live down there anyway.
And I had already found out that I was pregnant. So we just didn't want to be traveling around, and, we wanted to settle somewhere. So we went back to Flint, moved in with my folks for a little while, and he got a job working on the railroad
Yeah, I worked for the railroad.
until he got
Baltimore, Ohio.
What was your job?
Inspecting, well, at first it was cleaning boxcars for automotive shipment. Well, I was only worked for them. Well, they pay a day for the railroaders just twice a month, 2 weeks each. I never received my first paycheck.
He got called to Fisher Body.
Well, I got the job, I should. And I didn't want to work out outside
Hated
anyway.
that working outside.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of skipped over from when the war started.
Mm-hmm.
Grandma explained what she was doing. When the war did start, when did you get more involved in, I'll call it active duty?
Well, there, after we were in Trinidad, and the bomb group I was with, I was in the headquarters squadron, and the first bomb squadron was with us, and we had 3 other bomb squadrons. Let's see, one of them was in British Dutch Guiana, which is on the northern edge of South America. And what the heck's that Dutch island we went to?
Aruba.
Aruba. We had a squadron on Aruba. And the other one was in Guatemala.
Yeah, but that's not saying what you did.
No, that's not what I did, but I was tied with them groups, and I was doing the paperwork for all the bombardiers in the whole group. And then they and of course that was all where the bomb sites were, and our office then went in with the mechanics that was working on the bomb sites. They have to be serviced 25-hour inspection, 50-hour, and on like that. And so they started a school there in Trinidad for the whole Caribbean area. And I went to that, And then we was going along and one of the bomb site mechanics for the 5th group, which was on St. Lucia at that time. So they needed somebody, so I got transferred from Trinidad to St. Lucia. And there we were doing sub patrol, which was the plane would take off at 6 in the morning, you would land at noon, and the one that took off at noon would land at 6.
Yeah, but
And they-
were you on those planes?
Only when I had to be. But they were, at that time on these bombers we had, they were B-18As, and they were what we call mechanical follow-up on the autopilot. And all you could do, once they were adjusted to a flight, straight and level, then the pilots and the crews couldn't do anything to change it. Well, if something happened on the ship, weight change or that, and the plane would be flying sideways or maybe climbing all the time, or of course it couldn't dive because they just couldn't use it then. And we'd have to go, I'd go on the tour with that bomb, on that bomber, and we'd take off, and we're going to be flying 6 hours, right? Well, within the first half hour, I would have my adjustments made, and then the pilots could turn around and play checkers or poker like they usually did. The only guy on the plane was the poor radio operator. He had to watch the scope all the time because he's looking for things on the surface, and us, the rest of us, what are we? All we could see was water and clouds or sun. And I went on a few of them missions just in flight controls all the time, but
They were
it was a boring trip.
They were searching for Nazi subs in the Atlantic.
Well, at that time, after I was, of course, I was in Trinidad when it started, but then we moved up to St. Lucia. But our planes, at all this time, the German subs was after the shipping lane. They shipped down from New York or New Orleans and them places down through the Caribbean, and then they went across the Atlantic to Africa, because that's where they were starting their African campaign before the war progressed along and we got into Italy. See, they done those and first before they had the D-Day and they landed on France.
But you didn't answer, was there any submarines in that area?
Yes.
Were they
They
German?
were chasing, German subs chasing our shipping.
Okay,
And if you was on the crew and they spotted a sub and we dropped depth charges on them, and if they got a sub, then that crew got a 15-day leave back in the States. And there was a few of the crews went, but not too many. But right after December 7th, they're in, well, what the heck, in the harbor. Our base in Trinidad was about the middle of the island. We were maybe 10 miles from the harbor. Well, a German sub come in behind one of the ships and set in the harbor and torpedoed, I don't know how many, they got 3 or 4 ships sitting there in the harbor there. And they, all from our air base, the planes would load with bombs, fly down to the harbor, and they knew where they had seen the sub, so they started zero there and started bombing out, and they finally got it the same day that it got in there. And at that time on them harbors, they had nets they put up. They'd open for the ship to come in, then they'd close them. Well, this sub was close enough to a ship and followed it in before they closed the nets.
See, and we never heard any of that back in the States, you never knew that
No,
was
you
going
didn't know
on
none of
there.
that stuff. But the planes with the bombers we had there, it would take off and drop them down in the harbor and come back and load up and go do it again. And I don't know how many planes was involved in it, but it was 4 or 5 or more bombers.
Were you scared? I mean, thinking of it as a human,
Well,
or was it just something you had to do? And
no, we weren't near enough to be involved in anything down there. At one of the bases, I think it was the one in Guatemala, where the airstrip took off, you were out over the ocean. Well, the German sub did come up off the end of the airstrip, and of course they have small guns on there, 5-inch or so, and he set off with the thing and they fired the shells onto the airstrip. I don't remember if they actually hit anything or not, but I imagine they did. Of course I wasn't there, so I don't know how much damage was done, but we did hear about it because it was within our group.
Mhm.
And then after we got married, after he come home and we got married, he went back overseas, and that's when he went to Saipan.
That's out in the Pacific.
Then he got there, Saipan had been secured somewhat, and when he got there.
Well, yeah,
It wasn't
they
complete.
started, let's see, the D-Day on Saipan was June the 16th of 44. And we left on the west coast from LA, around LA, and aboard ship on what the hang,